Chapter 1. The mud tasted like copper and despair. Vespera kept her head bowed against the freezing cobblestones of the sun-drenched courtyard. The spring equinox festival raged around her, in a blur of vibrant colors. Silk gowns brushed past her bruised knuckles. She was nothing but a scullery maid, a creature of ash, dirt, and forced silence. Then, the scent hit her. It was sharp. It smelled of blooming goldenrod and arrogant power. The mate bond snapped into existence with a visceral crack that echoed in her very marrow. An invisible burning tether locked around her ribcage. It yanked her gaze upward, dragging her attention to the top of the sweeping marble dais. Alpha King Torin stared down at her. His golden crown caught the blinding light, but his perfect sculpted face twisted in utter revulsion. Silence plummeted over the courtyard. 10,000 wolves stopped breathing. "A mistake," Torin sneered. His voice echoed like a whip crack against the ancient stone walls. He descended the steps with lethal grace. His polished boots stopped inches from her raw, bleeding fingers. Before she could even process the violent pull of her own soul, his heel came down hard on her hand. The bones in her fingers ground together under his weight. Vespera did not scream. She swallowed the agony. Her defiant eyes locked onto his. "The moon goddess plays a cruel joke," Torin announced to the horrified crowd. "This filth is no mate of mine. She is human scum." He drew a ceremonial silver dagger from his belt. The metal gleamed with cruel, immediate intent. "I reject this bond," he growled. He raised the blade high. It was meant to plunge into her shoulder. It was meant to sever the spiritual tie with a physical bleeding mark. Vespera closed her eyes. She braced for the tearing of her own soul. The strike never landed. A sudden plunging drop in temperature stole the breath from the courtyard. The scent of volcanic ash and dark pine suffocated the sickly, sweet goldenrod. An imposing shadow stepped between her and the sun. A hand wrapped in leather and scarred skin caught the falling blade mid-air. Flesh met silver. The metal buckled. With a sharp, brutal twist of his wrist, the stranger crushed the royal dagger into useless shrapnel. Silver shards rained down upon the cobblestones. Vespera looked up through her tangled, dirty hair. He was a towering mountain of a man. His armor was as dark as a starless night, violently scarred by countless wars. It was Alpha King Auric of Obsidian, the rival, the warlord, the barbarian of the Ashlands. Torin stumbled back. His eyes went wide with aristocratic fury. "What is the meaning of this, Auric? This is a sunflare execution." Auric ignored the Golden King completely. He unclasped the thick obsidian fur cloak from his broad shoulders. With surprising, devastating gentleness, he draped it over Vespera's trembling frame. The fur held his intense body heat. It smelled of campfire smoke, rain, and wild earth. For the first time in 20 years, she felt warm. Auric's calloused fingers brushed gently against her dirt-streaked cheek. At that fleeting contact, a strange phenomenon occurred. The legendary, bloodthirsty wolf inside the Obsidian King, a beast known to terrorize entire armies, went completely, utterly still. A profound, sacred silence settled deep in his chest. He looked down into her bearing, defiant eyes. He found his anchor. Auric stood tall. He faced the Golden King and the thousands of whispering nobles. "You're trash," Auric's voice boomed, a guttural rumble that shook the very foundations of the palace. "Is my queen." Chaos erupted. Swords were drawn in a silver flash. The metallic hiss of weapons filled the tense air. Torin's face turned violently red. "Kill them. Kill the barbarian and the rat." Auric did not hesitate. He scooped Vespera into his arms. She was terrifyingly light against his solid, armored chest. Her hands instinctively gripped the leather straps of his breastplate, seeking the steady, thunderous rhythm of his heart. He let out a deafening whistle that shattered the nearest palace windows. From the clouds above, a colossal winged beast plummeted toward the courtyard. It was a war mount of the volcanic peaks, a monstrous hybrid of leather wings and shadow. It hit the cobblestones with a force that cracked the earth in two. Auric vaulted onto the saddle. He pulled Vespera securely against his chest, shielding her fragile body with his own. "Loose the arrows," Torrin screamed. His voice broke in hysterical, terrified rage. "Poison the sky!" The beast spread its imposing wings. It launched into the air just as 1,000 toxic arrows darkened the sun, chasing them into the violent storm-filled horizon. Chapter 2. The descent was a violent tear through the sky. Wind lashed at Vespera's face like icy blades. Below them, the world bled from vibrant green into a desolate expanse of charred earth. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of sulfur and ancient burning mountains. The beast banked hard. It plummeted toward a towering fortress carved directly into the jagged spine of a volcano. This was Obsidian, the graveyard of kings. The creature slammed into the courtyard. Stone fractured beneath its talons. Auric dismounted with fluid, lethal grace. He did not wait for her to process the terrifying flight. He simply scooped her up again. She clutched his dark armor. Her knuckles turned white. The halls of the fortress were cavernous. Shadows danced along the walls, illuminated only by flickering torches. There were no golden tapestries here. There was only iron, stone, and the quiet vigilance of scarred soldiers. They bowed their heads in silent reverence as Auric passed. He kicked open a thick oak door. The bedroom was surprisingly warm. It was dominated by a colossal hearth and a sprawling bed draped in dark furs. He set her down on her feet. The moment his hands left her waist, a sharp, cold ache bloomed in her chest. Auric took a step back. He crossed his muscular arms. He refused to look directly into her eyes. A muscle feathered in his tight jaw. "Wash," he commanded. His voice was a low, grating rumble. It sounded angrier than it had in the sunlight. "You smell like that golden coward. It makes my teeth itch." He turned on his heel. The thick door slammed shut behind him. The lock turned with a definitive echoing click. Vespera flinched. She wrapped the oversized black cloak tighter around her trembling shoulders. She was still a prisoner. The golden cage had simply been replaced by a cage of volcanic rock. She dragged herself to the copper bathing tub in the corner. Steaming water waited for her. She was terrified. What did a warlord want with a human maid? A strange scratching noise broke the silence. Vespera gasped. She backed away from the tub. A small furry creature squeezed through the iron bars of the high window. It hit the floor with a soft thud. In a blink, the brown weasel shifted. A scrawny man in leather armor stood before her. He had a sharp nose and bright, mischievous eyes. "Don't scream," the man whispered frantically. He held up a greasy linen cloth. "I bring peace offerings and roasted boar." Vespera stared at him. She did not scream. She had lost the energy for panic hours ago. "I am Pip," the shifter said. He bowed with exaggerated theatrical courtesy. Head scout of the Obsidian Vanguard, and currently the only one brave enough to check on the terrifying new queen. Vespera frowned. She cautiously accepted the wrapped meat. The smell made her stomach clench with violent hunger. "He locked me in. I am a hostage." Pip let out a sharp, barking laugh. He hopped onto the edge of a mahogany table. "A hostage? Oh, sweet moon. The king is pacing a trench into the war room floor right now. He locked the door because he is terrified of you." "Terrified of me?" Vespera took a small bite of the meat. It was celestial. "He is a warlord." "He is a fool," Pip corrected cheerfully. "Well, romantically speaking, our glorious Alpha knows how to sever a head with a dull axe. He does not know what to do with a crying female, especially his fated mate." Vespera stopped chewing. She looked around the imposing room. Why are his soldiers so different? Broken, you mean? Pip's smile softened. It lost its mocking edge. Obsidian is the land of the discarded. Every soldier out there is missing an eye, a limb, or a piece of their soul. Auric takes in the wolves that Sunflare throws away. He barks loud, but his bite is strictly reserved for tyrants. Pip winked. He shifted back into a weasel and scrambled up the stone wall. "Eat, sleep. He will not bite you, unless you ask nicely." He squeezed out the window, disappearing into the howling wind. Vespera bathed. She scrubbed the mud and the lingering scent of Sunflare from her bruised skin. The hot water felt like a revelation. She crawled into the sprawling bed, buried beneath layers of dark fur. Exhaustion finally dragged her into a deep, feverish sleep. Hours later, the lock snapped. The oak door burst open. The wood splintered violently against the stone wall. Vespera jolted awake, her heart hammered against her ribs. Auric stood in the doorway. The hallway torches cast long, imposing shadows across his towering frame. He was breathing hard. His chest rose and fell in frantic, erratic heaves. He stepped into the room. His eyes were no longer dark. They burned with a blinding, predatory amber light. His nostrils flared, tracking an invisible trail in the air. He was not looking at the girl in his bed. He was reacting to the scent. A new scent was flooding the room. It was not the smell of a human maid. It was not the smell of a wolf. It was something wild, ancient, and terrifyingly dangerous, pouring directly from Vespera's fever-hot skin. Chapter 3. It did not start as a simple sickness. It was a phantom fire, igniting her marrow and boiling her blood from the inside out. Vespera curled into a tight, agonizing ball among the dark furs. Her breath came in short, desperate gasps. The heat radiating from her body was unnatural. It was a dry, scorching furnace that threatened to consume her entirely. Auric stood frozen by the ruined oak door. His amber eyes tracked the violent tremors shaking her fragile frame. The wild, ancient scent flooding the room was intoxicating, but it was laced with the sharp, acidic tang of profound pain. He did not call for the healers. He did not shout for guards. He crossed the stone floor with predatory silence. When he reached the bed, he dropped to his knees. His imposing frame dwarfed the mattress. Carefully, he pulled the heavy furs away from her burning skin. Vespera let out a fractured cry. She tried to pull away, terrified of what he would see. Her skin was breaking apart. Where the layers of 20-year-old dirt and ash finally peeled away, it did not reveal soft, flushed human flesh. It revealed jagged, terrifying fissures. Deep beneath the surface of her skin, patches of cold gray stone were forming. It looked like volcanic rock hardening over a lake of fire. She was a monster. She was turning into a grotesque statue right before his eyes. "Don't look," she pleaded. Her voice was a dry, broken whisper. "Please." Auric did not recoil. The warlord who had slaughtered thousands did not show a single ounce of disgust. Instead, his jaw locked in fierce determination. He moved to the hearth and grabbed a bronze basin, filling it with cold water and crushed winter mint from a leather pouch at his belt. He returned to her side. He dipped a clean linen cloth into the water. "I have looked at death for a century," Auric rumbled softly. His voice was a dark, soothing vibration. I will not look away from you. He began to wash her. His touch was a paradox. His hands were lethal weapons, scarred and calloused by decades of brutal warfare. Yet the way he dragged the damp cloth over her burning, fractured skin was an act of absolute reverence. He wiped away the blood, the mud, and the remnants of the Sunflare kingdom. Every time his rough fingers grazed the hardened stone-like patches on her arms, a jolt of raw electricity shot down her spine. The air in the bedroom grew impossibly thick. The tension between them was a physical, suffocating force. Vespera gasped as his thumb traced a deep, glowing fissure near her collarbone. The contact sent a wave of cooling relief through her scorched veins. She instinctively arched into his touch. Auric's breath hitched. A low territorial growl vibrated deep within his broad chest. His amber eyes darkened with pure, unadulterated desire, tightly leashed by his iron will. It hurts, she whimpered, her fingers curling into the sheets. I am burning alive. I know, he whispered. He leaned closer. The scent of pine and rain surrounded her, pushing back the smell of her own fever. Your body is shedding its cage. You need an anchor. Auric did not hesitate. He drew a small obsidian dagger from his boot. Without breaking eye contact, he dragged the sharp edge across the center of his own palm. Dark, rich, alpha blood welled to the surface. It smelled of raw power and ancient earth. Drink, he commanded softly. He pressed his bleeding hand to her parched lips. Let my blood cool the fire. Vespera did not fight him. Driven by an instinct she did not understand, her lips parted. She tasted him. The moment his blood touched her tongue, the unbearable agony shattered. His alpha energy rushed into her veins like a glacier, powerful and overwhelmingly protective. It wrapped around her frantic, racing heart. She let out a soft, contented sigh, her hands instinctively coming up to grip his thick wrist, holding him closer. Auric shuddered. He rested his forehead against hers. They stayed like that in the quiet darkness, sharing breath, sharing blood, bridging the chasm between a broken maid and a scarred king. He spent the entire night kneeling by her bed, offering his blood whenever the fever spiked, his thumb tracing the new, beautiful stone patterns emerging on her skin. He told her stories of his own scars. He showed her the jagged mark on his neck where Torin had tried to execute him years ago. For the first time in her miserable existence, Vespera was not a piece of trash to be swept away. She was cherished. She was safe. But safety is a fleeting illusion. Dawn broke over the volcanic peaks, casting a pale gray light through the iron-barred window. Vespera was finally sleeping peacefully against Auric's chest. Thwack! The sound was razor-sharp. Glass shattered inward. Auric moved with blinding speed. He shielded Vespera with his armored back just as a black-fletched arrow buried itself deep into the oak bedpost, mere inches from her head. A small rolled parchment was tied to the shaft, sealed with golden wax, the crest of Sunflare. Auric ripped the arrow from the wood. He broke the seal. His amber eyes scanned the elegant, cruel handwriting. The temperature in the room plummeted to freezing. Vespera sat up, clutching the furs to her chest. What is it? Auric's hands trembled with murderous, uncontrollable rage. He crushed the parchment in his fist. A ransom demand, Auric whispered, his voice dripping with lethal promise. Torin says you are not human. He says if I do not return the weapon immediately, he will detonate the bloodbane spell planted in your heart. Chapter 4. The words on the crumpled parchment felt like a death sentence. Vespera stared at the jagged handwriting. The room spun. The phantom fire in her veins flared, but this time it was fueled by pure, unadulterated terror, not human. The words echoed in her mind. A weapon, the bloodbane spell. "Gargoyle wolf," Auric read aloud. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. He did not look afraid. He looked murderous. The ancient guardians of the mountain. They were thought to be extinct, slaughtered by sunflare centuries ago. Vespera looked down at her trembling hands. The gray, stone-like patches were spreading rapidly, covering her forearms in a thick, impenetrable armor. It was not a disease. It was an awakening. The 20 years of dirt and ash she had worn as a maid was a natural seal, a desperate attempt by her body to hide her true lineage. Torin had not rejected her because she was a weak human. He had rejected her because she was dormant, and now that she was waking up, he wanted his immortal meat shield back. "I have a bomb in my chest," she whispered. Her voice shook, cracking under the crushing weight of the revelation. "He put a spell in my heart when I was a child. If you do not give me back, he will destroy this entire fortress." She pushed the heavy furs aside. Her bare feet hit the freezing floor. She had to leave. She was a monster. She was a ticking weapon that would bring death to the only place that had ever offered her a warm bed and a gentle touch. "I have to go," she choked out, stumbling toward the ruined oak door. "If I run far enough, the blast will only take me. You and your soldiers will be safe." She did not make it 3 steps. Auric moved with terrifying predatory speed. He intercepted her, his massive frame blocking the exit completely. He did not grab her aggressively, but his large hands clamped onto her waist, lifting her effortlessly until her back hit the solid stone wall. "Stop," he commanded. "Let me go," she sobbed. She beat her hardening fists against his armored chest. The sound was no longer the soft thud of human flesh, but the heavy, hollow clack of stone against metal. "I am a monster, Auric. I will kill you all." Auric slammed his hands flat against the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. His face was inches from hers. His amber eyes blazed with a fierce territorial fire that stole the breath from her lungs. "I do not care if you are a monster," he growled. The sound vibrated directly against her lips. "I do not care if you are a god. I do not care if Torin brings the wrath of the heavens down upon my gates." He leaned in closer. The intoxicating scent of dark pine and wild earth washed over her, battling her frantic panic. "You are my queen," he whispered fiercely, his gaze locked onto her wide, terrified eyes. "You are my mate. I will burn Sunflare to ashes before I let that golden coward touch a single scale on your skin." A sharp, agonizing snap echoed through the room. Vespera gasped. Her eyes widened in pure, blinding agony. The awakening could no longer be contained. The alpha power pulsing from Auric had acted as a catalyst, shattering the final remnants of her physical seal. Her spine arched violently off the wall. The sickening sound of tearing flesh filled the quiet bedroom. Auric stumbled back. His eyes went wide as a colossal wave of ancient, suffocating power exploded from her small frame. The magic was dark, heavy, and tasted of ozone and crushed diamonds. 2 massive obsidian wings tore through the skin of her back. They unfolded with a deafening crack, stretching wide across the room. The stone feathers were razor-sharp, glinting like black glass in the dim light. They crashed into the ceiling above, bringing down a violent shower of dust and shattered rock. Vespera screamed, but the sound was no longer human. It was a guttural, feral roar of an apex predator. Her mind fractured. The excruciating pain of the transformation wiped away her reason, leaving only wild, protective instinct. She did not recognize the room. She did not recognize the imposing man standing before her. She only saw a perceived threat. With a vicious snarl, the gargoyle wolf lashed out. A sharp, diamond-hard stone talon drove straight forward. It pierced effortlessly through Oryx's dark breastplate. The sound of metal buckling and flesh tearing was devastatingly loud. The stone claw sank deep into the warlord's shoulder, pinning him in place as fresh, hot alpha blood spilled onto the stone floor. Chapter 5. Hot blood spilled across the freezing stone. Oryx did not flinch. The diamond-hard talon was buried deep inside his left shoulder, pinning him in place. Vespera's feral eyes locked onto his. They were completely devoid of human recognition. She was a creature of ancient, violent instinct, driven by the sole purpose of survival. She let out a deafening roar. She tried to rip her arm free from his flesh. Instead of pulling away, Oryx stepped forward. He deliberately drove the stone blade deeper into his own muscle. The agonizing maneuver trapped her arm against his chest. He ignored the lethal wound. He wrapped his right arm securely around her waist, pulling her cold, hardened body flush against his armor. "I have you," Oryx rumbled. His voice was a steady, grounding vibration. "You are safe," Vespera thrashed wildly. Her colossal obsidian wings battered the stone walls, bringing down chunks of the ceiling. She snapped her teeth, a vicious display of lethal intent. But Oryx simply buried his face in her wild, tangled hair. He let his scent of dark pine and rain wrap entirely around her. He pressed her stone hand flat against his chest, right over his heart. Thump, thump, thump. The slow, thunderous rhythm of his alpha heart echoed through her hardened veins. He pushed his own life force through the bleeding wound, flooding her chaotic mind with pure, unyielding protection. The oak door burst open. Pip scrambled into the ruined room. The scout took one look at the towering gargoyle wolf impaling his king and let out a terrified squeak. "Hold her!" Pip yelled. He tossed a handful of shimmering silver powder into the turbulent air. "It is moon dust. It will soothe the frantic mind." The dust settled over them like fresh snow, but it was not the magic powder that anchored her. It was the blood. It was the impossible, undeniable truth that this terrifying warlord was willing to bleed out just to hold her together. The feral, glowing light in Vespera's eyes flickered. It broke. Human awareness slammed back into her consciousness. The scent of copper hit her nose. She looked down and saw her own arm, transformed into a lethal weapon, buried in the chest of the only man who had ever treated her with kindness. A choked gasp tore from her throat. Profound, paralyzing remorse hit her like a physical blow. "No," she whimpered. The beastly resonance faded from her voice. "No, please. No." The transformation reversed in a violent rush of energy. The towering obsidian wings dissolved into fine black ash, raining down upon the bedroom floor. The impenetrable gray scales melted back into soft, flawless skin. She pulled her trembling hand from his shoulder. Vespera collapsed to her knees, weeping uncontrollably. Oryx caught her before she hit the floor. He ignored the blood pouring down his armor. He dropped down beside her amidst the rubble and ash. His large, calloused hands framed her face, forcing her to look at him. "I hurt you," she sobbed, completely broken. "I told you I was a monster." "You are a survivor," Oryx corrected fiercely. He tilted her chin up. His amber eyes burned with a devotion so intense it stole the air from the room. He did not ask for permission. He did not hesitate. Oryx pressed his mouth to hers. It was a deeply consuming, fierce kiss. It tasted of copper, ash, and desperate salvation. It was not a gentle brush of lips. It was a profound claiming of souls. Vespera melted against him, her fingers tangling in his dark hair as she finally surrendered to the undeniable pull of their bond. He swallowed her sobs, replacing her crushing guilt with the steady, protective fire of his alpha spirit. For a fleeting, perfect minute, the war outside did not exist. Then, a war horn shattered the silence. The sound was a long, guttural blast that vibrated through the very foundations of the mountain. It was immediately followed by another, and another. Auric broke the kiss, his jaw tightening instantly. He pulled Vespera behind him, shielding her instinctively as he looked toward the shattered window. Pip was already perched on the stone ledge. The scout's face was completely drained of color. "King Auric," Pip stammered, his voice trembling with genuine terror. "They are here." "Who?" Auric demanded, standing tall despite his bleeding shoulder. "All of them," Pip whispered, pointing toward the horizon. 5 different banners. Torin bribed the High Council. He brought the allied armies. They are marching on the gates right now, demanding we surrender the gargoyle. Chapter 6. The war horns did not stop. They tore through the freezing mountain air like jagged glass. Auric turned away from the ruined window. He was already buckling a fresh iron pauldron over his torn, bleeding shoulder. His face was a mask of cold, lethal calculation. The tender, desperate lover from seconds ago was gone. The warlord of Obsidian had returned. "Pip," Auric commanded. His voice was absolute iron. "Take her down to the catacombs. Use the eastern tunnels. Do not stop running until you hit the underground river." Pip nodded frantically. He grabbed Vespera's wrist. "Come on, my queen. We have to go." Vespera did not move. She stood up slowly from the ash-covered floor. She looked at her hands. The gray, stone-like scales were gone, but the immense, pulsing thrum of ancient magic still vibrated beneath her skin. She wiped a streak of Auric's blood from her cheek. "No," she said quietly. Auric froze. He looked back at her. The air in the room grew dangerously tight. "Vespera, this is not a negotiation. They have an army." "And you are wounded because of me," she replied. Her voice did not shake. She lifted her chin. Her eyes caught the pale morning light, shifting from a dull human brown to a startling luminous silver. "I have spent 20 years scrubbing floors on my knees. I have let other people decide my worth. I am done hiding in the dark. I am done being the prey." Auric stared at her. For a fleeting second, the terrifying warlord looked completely breathless. A fierce, agonizing pride burned in his amber eyes. He did not have time to argue. The fortress gates groaned under the impact of a battering ram. He closed the distance between them, pressing a hard, desperate kiss to her forehead. "Then stay on the high parapet. If the gates fall, you fly." He did not wait for her answer. He drew his colossal battle axe and sprinted down the stone corridor. Vespera ran to the balcony. Below her, the valley was a chaotic sea of hostile banners. Sunflare gold clashed violently against the gray volcanic ash. The air smelled of sulfur, sweat, and impending death. The obsidian gates shattered. Auric led the vanguard. He fought like a demon reborn. His axe cleaved through the enemy ranks with devastating, terrifying precision. Every swing was a lethal dance of power and fury. The rival soldiers fell like autumn leaves before a winter storm. But Torin was not fighting fair. The Golden King stood safely behind his front lines. He had brought 3 other Alpha Kings and an entire coven of dark mages. Vespera watched in horror as the mages chanted. They wove a treacherous, glowing net of purple magic across the battlefield. It was a binding hex. The arcane energy snaked through the mud, wrapping violently around Auric's boots. The spell dragged the colossal warlord to his knees, right in the center of the carnage. The three rival alphas immediately surrounded him. They raised their silver spears, pinning him within a lethal cage of celestial magic. Seeing her anchor bleed, seeing the proud king forced to his knees, triggered something infinitely deeper than fear inside Vespera. The ancient, dormant lineage of the gargoyle wolf fully ignited. The phantom fire returned to her veins, but this time it was not agonizing. It was glorious. It was the purest form of absolute protection. Down in the mud, Torin finally stepped forward. His golden armor remained perfectly clean. He drew a long, venom-laced broadsword. He aimed the glowing blade directly for the back of Oryx's exposed neck. "Die, barbarian," Torin sneered. His voice echoed across the quieted battlefield. "And I will take my weapon back." Vespera stepped onto the stone ledge. She did not hesitate. She leaped into the empty air. She did not fall. The transformation was instantaneous and painless. Obsidian scales rippled across her skin, forming an impenetrable diamond-hard armor. Two colossal wings tore through the fabric of the sky, scattering the morning clouds. She was a majestic, terrifying vision of ancient wrath. The sky turned violently dark. Just as Torin swung the lethal blade down toward Oryx's neck, a colossal shadow eclipsed the sun. An impact of world-shattering force hit the center of the battlefield. The shockwave blasted outward. Torin and his alphas were hurled backward like broken toys in a hurricane of crushed rock and wild, electric magic. When the dust finally settled, a towering, magnificent beast of black diamond stood directly over the kneeling warlord. The gargoyle wolf spread her gleaming wings, shielding him completely, and let out a roar that brought the entire allied army to its knees. Chapter 7. The battlefield fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The suffocating pressure of dark magic had vanished, completely neutralized by the ancient thrumming aura of the gargoyle wolf. Vespera stood towering over Oryx. Her obsidian scales caught the first rays of the morning sun, refracting the light into a blinding display of diamond and shadow. She did not look like a monster. She looked like a deity of war, carved from the very bones of the earth. Torin groaned. He dragged himself out of the mud, his perfect golden armor dented and smeared with filth. He stared up at the colossal beast. His narcissistic mind still refused to comprehend his defeat. "You belong to me," Torin spat, though his voice trembled with undeniable terror. He raised a hand, desperately trying to invoke the bloodbane spell. "Submit, you filthy creature." Vespera did not roar. She simply moved. With a single devastating sweep of her wing, she generated a gale-force wind that knocked the three rival alphas flat on their backs. She stepped forward. The earth quaked beneath her talons. She loomed over the Golden King, casting him entirely in her shadow. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered her magnificent head. Her luminous silver eyes locked onto his terrified gaze. She raised one diamond-hard talon and brought it down right on top of his head. She did not pierce his skull. Instead, the tip of her claw caught the rim of his jeweled crown. With a sickening scrape of metal, she flicked it off his head. The symbol of Sunflare's absolute authority hit the stone courtyard. Vespera brought her foot down. The crown fractured into 100 useless, glittering pieces. Torin fell to his knees, utterly broken. His pride was shattered completely. Oryx rose from the mud behind her. His left arm hung limply, but his right hand held his battle axe with lethal intent. He stepped past Vespera's protective wing. "The era of Sunflare is over," Oryx rumbled. His voice carried across the silent valley. He swung the axe. He did not sever Torrhen's head. Instead, he struck the Golden King's chest with the flat of the blade, channeling a brutal, concussive wave of raw alpha power directly into Torrhen's core. The impact fractured Torrhen's inner wolf, permanently severing his connection to the alpha lineage. The tyrant collapsed, weeping like a helpless child. The allied armies watched their invincible leader fall. The clatter of dropping swords began as a single echo, then swelled into a deafening wave. 10,000 soldiers dropped to their knees in absolute surrender. From the ruined balcony of the fortress, Pip popped his head out, waving a small soot-stained flag and cheering wildly. The war was over. Vespera closed her eyes. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a profound, sweeping exhaustion. The transformation reversed. The diamond scales melted back into soft, flawless skin. The towering wings dissolved into a gentle shower of black ash that caught the wind. She collapsed. Auric dropped his axe. He caught her before she hit the ground, gathering her against his uninjured side. His amber eyes swept over her face. She was no longer the dirty, ash-covered maid from the courtyard. Her skin glowed with a healthy, ethereal vitality. The 20 years of grime were gone, revealing a breathtaking, resilient beauty. "You did it," Auric whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. "You saved us all." Vespera smiled weakly. She reached up, her small fingers tracing the harsh lines of his jaw. "We saved each other." The sun broke fully over the volcanic peaks, casting a warm golden light across the dark fortress. Auric did not care about the thousands of surrendering soldiers. He did not care about the fallen kings. He only cared about the woman in his arms. Slowly, deliberately, the warlord of Obsidian lowered himself to one knee in the center of the battlefield. A collective gasp rippled through his own vanguard. An Alpha King never knelt. Auric ignored them. He took Vespera's delicate hand in his calloused, blood-stained fingers. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes burning with an eternity of devotion. "I, Auric of Obsidian, claim you before the gods and the earth," he declared, his voice a deep, resonant vow that vibrated in her very soul. "You are my equal. You are my queen, my anchor, and my heart." Vespera's eyes filled with tears. She did not hesitate. "I accept." He stood up and pulled her into a fierce, consuming kiss. The crowd of broken soldiers and hardened warriors erupted into a deafening roar of victory. Hours later, after the treaties were forced and the enemies banished, Auric carried her away from the blood and the mud, back into the quiet sanctuary of the mountain. He set her down gently by the roaring hearth in his chambers. The scent of pine and rain filled the room, washing away the metallic tang of war. He carefully tended to his own wounded shoulder, but his amber eyes never left her. When the firelight danced across her flawless skin, he pulled her into his lap. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her wild, sweet scent. The legendary beast inside him was completely at peace. "No more running," he murmured against her pulse, his lips brushing her skin in a tender, lingering caress. Vespera wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders, holding her mate close as the fire crackled in the hearth. No more hiding.